Business rivals are looking at a merger between their two companies. The heirs oppose this due to the long-standing animosity between the families. A short story. The air was crisp and cool in the city as dawn broke over the skyline, casting long shadows over towering skyscrapers and bustling streets. In two separate penthouses at opposite ends of the city, two heirs prepared to face their destinies. Jake Adams, a striking man in his late 20s with sleek black hair and a sophisticated sense of style, stood in front of his bedroom mirror. His piercing blue eyes were focused, his mind already racing through the agenda for the day. Adams Enterprises, the luxury fashion empire his family had built over generations, demanded his full attention. Today was particularly important. A major product launch was on the horizon, and the pressure was palpable. Jake was known for his cool, calm, and collected demeanor, never allowing the chaos around him to disturb his composure. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Claire Miller was finishing her morning workout. Her tall, athletic frame moved with precision as she completed her routine. With tousled brown hair and intense green eyes, Claire exuded a raw, untamed energy. She was known for her hot-headedness and wild nature, traits that often put her at odds with her more calculated peers. Miller Industries, a giant in the textile industry, was her responsibility. Like Jake, Claire had grown up in the shadow of a family legacy marked by ambition and success. Today, she had a crucial meeting that could secure a significant contract for her company. For as long as they could remember, the Adams and Miller families had been locked in fierce competition. This rivalry had been instilled in them by their respective grandfathers, both patriarchs who had built their empires from the ground up. The competition between the two families was legendary, a saga of corporate warfare that both Jake and Claire had been groomed to continue. They had crossed paths many times at industry events, each encounter charged with tension and unspoken challenge. Jake arrived at the Adams Enterprises headquarters, a sleek glass building that stood as a testament to modern luxury and innovation. He navigated the familiar halls with confidence, exchanging brief greetings with his team before stepping into the conference room. The room was filled with top executives, all waiting for his direction. "Good morning, everyone," Jake began, his voice commanding attention. "Let's get started. We have a lot to cover before the product launch." As the meeting progressed, Jake's meticulous attention to detail became evident. He addressed every concern, leaving no stone unturned. His calm demeanor reassured his team, even as they faced the high stakes of the launch. Across town, Claire was preparing for her meeting in a very different manner. The Miller Industries headquarters, a towering edifice of steel and concrete, reflected the company's robust and gritty reputation. Claire's approach was less structured but equally effective. She thrived in the chaos, often making decisions on the fly with a confidence that bordered on recklessness. "All right, let's get this show on the road," Claire announced as she entered the boardroom, exuding a palpable energy that invigorated her team. "We've got a big contract on the line, and I need everyone at their best." Her team responded to her fiery enthusiasm, tackling problems head-on and brainstorming innovative solutions. Claire's leadership style, though unorthodox, inspired loyalty and creativity. Later that evening, both Jake and Claire received unexpected messages from their parents. Jake's parents, Laura and Richard Adams, and Claire's parents, Robert and Patricia Miller, summoned them to a private dinner at the Miller residence. The urgency in their tone was unmistakable. Jake arrived at the Millers' luxurious apartment overlooking the city, greeted by the familiar scent of his mother's perfume and the sight of the opulent dining room. Claire arrived shortly after, equally puzzled by the sudden invitation. Both sets of parents, Laura and Richard Adams along with Robert and Patricia Miller, were already seated, their expressions serious. As they sat down to dinner, Laura and Robert exchanged a glance before revealing the news that would shake both heirs to their cores. "We've been in discussions with the Millers," Laura began, her tone serious, "and we've decided that merging Adams Enterprises and Miller Industries is the best course of action for both families." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "You can't be serious," he exclaimed, his voice betraying his usual composure. Robert continued, "This merger will consolidate our resources and ensure the longevity of both companies. It's a strategic move." Claire's reaction was explosive. "This is a betrayal," she shouted, her temper flaring. "We've been rivals for generations, and now you want us to join forces?" Laura spoke firmly. "We understand this is a shock, but the market is changing. This is the best way to secure our future." Richard nodded in agreement. "We've carefully considered all the options, and this merger is the most beneficial path forward." Patricia added, "It's not just about the business. It's about the future of our families. We've seen how this rivalry has consumed us. It's time to find a better way." But for Jake and Claire, the idea of working together was inconceivable. The dinner ended in heated arguments and unresolved tensions. Jake stormed out of the Miller residence, his mind racing with strategic possibilities, his calm exterior hiding the storm within. He exited with a composed yet icy demeanor, not saying a word to anyone as he left, his footsteps echoing ominously in the grand hallway. Claire, on the other hand, left in a whirlwind of fury. She slammed the door behind her as she exited, her face flushed with anger and her temper flaring. She muttered curses under her breath, vowing to do whatever it took to prevent the merger. Inside the Miller residence, a heavy silence filled the room after Jake and Claire's departure. Laura and Richard Adams and Robert and Patricia Miller sat quietly, absorbing the intensity of the confrontation. Laura sighed, breaking the silence. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but their reactions were even more intense than I expected. Robert nodded, his expression thoughtful. They've been raised in this rivalry shaped by our fathers. We can't expect them to embrace this change overnight. But it has to be done, Laura said firmly. The market is changing, and we need to adapt. This merger is the best way to secure the future for both our families. Patricia agreed. We'll need to guide them through this, show them the potential benefits. They're both smart and capable. In time, they'll understand. Richard added, it's not just about merging businesses. We need to find a way to merge our families, to heal the wounds that have been festering for generations. As they discussed their next steps, a sense of resolve settled over them. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were determined to see the merger through, for the sake of their legacies and the future of their companies. Jake Adams woke up to the soft hum of his alarm. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, the events of the previous night replaying in his mind. The merger, the argument, Claire's furious exit. He sighed deeply and rolled out of bed, his mind already formulating plans to counteract the impending merger. Jake was not one to sit idly by while decisions were made without his input. He prided himself on his strategic thinking and ability to remain composed under pressure. Today would be no different. He had a company to protect and a legacy to uphold. Meanwhile, across town, Claire Miller was lacing up her running shoes, her jaw set in determination. She needed to burn off the lingering anger from last night. The thought of merging with Adams Enterprises was against everything she had been taught. Her grandfather had built Miller Industries with his own hands, and she was not about to let that legacy be absorbed into their rival's empire. Claire jogged through the city streets, her mind racing faster than her feet. She would find a way to sabotage this merger, even if it meant going head-to-head with Jake. Her fiery nature thrived on conflict, and this situation would be no different. Later that morning, both Jake and Claire arrived at their respective offices, each with a renewed sense of purpose. Jake had called an emergency board meeting, while Claire had gathered her senior management team. They both knew that their first step had to be solidifying the support of their key players. Jake's team filed into the sleek conference room, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. He stood at the head of the table, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. We have a situation, Jake began, his voice steady. Our families have decided to merge Adams Enterprises with Miller Industries. A murmur of shock rippled through the room, but Jake raised his hand to silence it. I understand your concerns, and I share them. This merger is not in our best interest. However, we need to approach this strategically. We will evaluate all aspects of the merger and find a way to protect our company. Across town, Claire faced her own team in a conference room that reflected the industrial strength of Miller Industries. She paced in front of them, her intense green eyes flashing with determination. Our parents have lost their minds, Claire announced bluntly. They want to merge us with Adams Enterprises. This is a direct threat to everything we've built. Her team exchanged uneasy glances, but they knew better than to question Claire's resolve. We will find weaknesses in their proposal, exploit any vulnerabilities, and ensure this merger does not go through. I need everyone on board, ready to fight. After the meetings, Jake drove to his parents' estate, determined to confront them about the merger. Despite his usual logical and calm thinking, he felt a surge of emotion as he walked into the grand living room where Laura and Richard were waiting. Jake, we didn't expect you so soon, Laura said, standing up to greet him. We know last night was a shock. But, a shock? That's putting it mildly, Jake interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically harsh. How could you even consider merging with the Millers? This goes against everything we've worked for. Richard frowned, his expression stern. Jake, this merger is about securing our future. The market is changing, and we need to adapt. Jake shook his head, his composure slipping. There has to be another way. Partnering with them is not the solution. This rivalry is in our blood. You taught me that. Laura sighed, trying to soothe her son. We understand your feelings, Jake, but this is bigger than our rivalry. It's about survival. No, Jake said firmly. It's about betrayal, and I won't stand for it. With that, he turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving his parents stunned by his vehement opposition. Claire, on the other hand, chose a different approach. She ignored her parents' attempts to explain the merger, refusing to engage in any discussion about it. She threw herself into her work, determined to find a way to sabotage the merger from within. Patricia and Robert tried repeatedly to talk to her, but Claire's fiery temper and stubbornness made it clear she would not be swayed. ######the first skirmish. As the day progressed, both Jake and Claire found themselves drawn into the complexities of the merger. Their parents had left them detailed plans, financial forecasts, and strategic outlines. It was clear that this merger was not a spur-of-the-moment decision but a carefully crafted strategy. Jake dove into the documents, looking for any loopholes or weaknesses he could exploit. Despite his anger, he knew he needed to approach this with a clear mind. His calm, strategic nature resurfaced as he meticulously combed through every detail. Claire, meanwhile, approached the problem with her characteristic intensity. She rallied her team, urging them to find any potential flaws in the merger plan. She knew that if she could find even one critical issue, she could use it to bring the whole deal crashing down. ####plans and plots. In the days that followed, Jake and Claire worked tirelessly, each in their own way. Jake's calm, methodical approach contrasted sharply with Claire's fiery determination, but both were equally effective. They made progress, finding potential weaknesses and gathering allies within their respective companies. One evening, as Jake was reviewing documents in his office, he received a call from an old family friend who had been a key advisor to his grandfather. The conversation was brief but enlightening, giving Jake a new angle to pursue. Claire, meanwhile, had managed to get in touch with an influential board member who had always been wary of Adams Enterprises. Their conversation was heated, but Claire's passion and conviction left a lasting impression. Their first major breakthrough came when they independently discovered a clause in the merger agreement that required unanimous approval from both companies' boards. It was a small but significant detail that could be leveraged to their advantage. Jake immediately began lobbying his board members, presenting compelling arguments against the merger. His calm, logical approach won over several key figures, creating a growing faction of dissent. Claire, on the other hand, used her fiery charisma to sway her board. Her passionate speeches and unwavering determination inspired others to join her cause, building a strong opposition within Miller Industries. As the days turned into weeks, their efforts began to bear fruit. Both boards grew increasingly divided, with dissenting voices gaining strength. The momentum was shifting in their favor, and for the first time, Jake and Claire felt a glimmer of hope. Despite their individual successes, the weight of their family's long-standing animosity was ever present in their minds. Each time Jake and Claire uncovered a new detail about the merger, they couldn't help but reflect on the bitter history that had defined their families for generations. Jake remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell him about the fierce competition with Miller Industries, the countless battles fought in boardrooms and markets. He recalled the pride his family took in their victories and the bitterness of their defeats. This merger felt like a betrayal of all those struggles and triumphs. Claire, too, was haunted by memories of her family's rivalry with the Adams. Her grandfather's tales of the cutthroat tactics employed by Adams Enterprises were etched into her mind. She had grown up with a fierce determination to outshine them, to prove that Miller Industries was superior. The thought of merging with their greatest enemy was almost unbearable. Both Jake and Claire were driven by a deep-seated need to honor their family's legacies. They worked tirelessly, fueled by the stories of the past and the desire to forge their own paths. The bad blood between the Adams and Miller families was not easily forgotten, and it continued to shape their actions and decisions. As they delved deeper into the merger documents, Jake and Claire found themselves more committed than ever to their respective causes. The road ahead was uncertain, but they were prepared to fight for their family's honor and the future of their companies. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Jake and Claire braced themselves for the battles yet to come, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. They were determined to protect their legacies no matter the cost. The next morning, Jake Adams woke up with a start. He glanced at his clock and realized, with horror, that he had overslept. It was entirely uncharacteristic of him to be late. He scrambled out of bed, his usually immaculate routine thrown into disarray. After hastily donning a tailored navy suit and a crisp white shirt, he rushed out the door, his mind racing with a mix of annoyance and urgency. Claire Miller, on the other hand, was having a similarly chaotic morning. After a grueling workout, she realized she had forgotten to set her alarm for an important early meeting. Scrambling, she threw on a stylish yet slightly mismatched outfit, a vivid green blouse and navy blue pants, and dashed out the door, her brown hair still slightly damp from a rushed shower. As fate would have it, Claire's route to work intersected with Jake's. Both were running late, and in their haste, they collided at a bustling intersection near their offices. "Watch where you're going," Claire snapped, rubbing her shoulder. Jake, equally flustered but determined to maintain his composure, shot back, "Maybe if you weren't sprinting like you're late for a marathon, we wouldn't have this problem." They both paused, realizing who they were speaking to. Their eyes locked in a moment of surprise, then quickly shifted to mutual annoyance. "Adams," Claire muttered, more to herself than to him. "Miller," Jake responded, with a curt nod. With a huff, Claire marched off towards Miller Industries, leaving Jake to shake his head in disbelief as he continued on to Adams Enterprises. Back in their respective offices, both Jake and Claire convened meetings with their closest allies to strategize their next moves against the merger. Jake sat at the head of a polished mahogany conference table, his team surrounding him. "We need to focus on the financials," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. "If we can prove that this merger will destabilize our stocks, we might have a chance to sway the board." One of his advisors, an older gentleman with years of experience in corporate finance, nodded. "I'll start running the numbers and see what we can find." Meanwhile, at Miller Industries, Claire was pacing in front of her team, her green eyes flashing with determination. "We need dirt on Adams Enterprises," she declared. "Anything that shows they're not as stable as they claim to be." Her head of PR, a sharp-witted woman named Lisa, smirked. "I've got a few contacts who owe me favors. I'll see what I can dig up." As both teams set to work, Jake and Claire couldn't shake the lingering irritation from their earlier encounter. The memory of their collision seemed to fuel their determination to thwart the merger, each more resolved than ever to prove their point. A week later, both families were scheduled to attend a high-profile charity gala. The event, held at the opulent Grand Regency Hotel, was one of the most anticipated social events of the year. Jake and Claire knew they couldn't avoid each other, but both were determined to maintain their composure. Jake arrived first, looking effortlessly elegant in a classic black tuxedo. He greeted acquaintances and business partners with his usual charm, but his mind was still on the merger and the need to find a way out. Claire arrived soon after, turning heads in a stunning red dress that contrasted beautifully with her brown hair. Her confidence was palpable, even as she scanned the room for Jake. They inevitably crossed paths near the bar, where Claire was ordering a drink. Jake approached, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Miller, Adams," Claire replied curtly, not meeting his gaze as she accepted her drink from the bartender. An awkward silence settled between them, until Jake broke it. "Look, we both know this merger is a bad idea, but maybe if we save it," Claire interrupted, her voice sharp. "We're not teaming up. I've got my own plan." Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, just stay out of my way." "As if," Claire retorted, turning on her heel and walking away. Despite their differences, Jake and Claire's encounters seemed to follow them. At the gala, they both found themselves cornered by nosy reporters eager for a scoop on the merger. In a moment of reluctant solidarity, they managed to deflect the questions with practiced smiles and vague answers. "Rumor has it the merger is going to be a game-changer," one reporter prodded. Jake forced a smile. "We're still evaluating all options." Claire added, with a hint of sarcasm, "It's a complex situation." After the reporters finally moved on, Jake turned to Claire. "We need to find a way to handle this media circus." "Agreed," Claire said reluctantly. "But that doesn't mean I'm on your side." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jake replied with a smirk. #the series of errors. As the evening wore on, Jake and Claire faced a series of challenges. Claire found herself cornered by an overly enthusiastic charity organizer who insisted she join the silent auction for a weekend spa retreat. "I'm really not interested," Claire tried to protest. "Nonsense. You'll love it," the organizer insisted, practically dragging her to the auction table. Meanwhile, Jake was trapped in a conversation with a boisterous tech mogul who was determined to pitch him a new app idea. Jake's polite nods and forced smiles did little to deter the man's enthusiasm. As the night wound down, Jake and Claire found themselves outside the hotel, both looking frazzled and more than ready to leave. "Rough night?" Jake asked, unable to hide a smirk. Claire rolled her eyes. "You have no idea. That auction lady was relentless." Jake chuckled. "I got stuck with a guy trying to sell me an app that tells you when to water your plants." Despite themselves, they both laughed, the tension between them momentarily easing. "I guess we're both having a hard time," Claire admitted. "Yeah," Jake agreed. "Maybe next time we'll have better luck." Claire arched an eyebrow. "Next time?" Jake shrugged. "You never know." With a final nod, they went their separate ways, each contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought them to this point. For all their differences, there was a growing sense of mutual respect, however grudging it might be. And so, with a mix of determination and reluctant camaraderie, Jake and Claire prepared for the battles yet to come. Jake Adams sat in his office, the late morning sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He reviewed the financials, his mind racing with potential strategies to stop the merger. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was his mother, Laura Adams. "Jake, we need to talk," Laura said, her tone firm. "Come by the house tonight." Jake sighed, already anticipating another argument, but he agreed. "I'll be there." Meanwhile, Claire Miller was in her own office, flipping through a stack of documents with frustration. Her phone rang, and she answered with a sharp, "What?" "Claire, it's Dad," Robert Miller said. "We need to discuss the merger. Come home for dinner tonight." Claire rolled her eyes but agreed. "Fine, I'll be there." That evening, Jake arrived at his parents' estate, his mood already sour. Laura and Richard were waiting for him in the dining room. "Jake," Laura began, "we understand your concerns about the merger, but you need to see the bigger picture." "The bigger picture?" Jake repeated, incredulous. "This is about survival. We need to stay ahead, not merge with our biggest rival." Richard leaned forward. "Have you considered the potential benefits? Combined resources, expanded market reach." Jake cut him off. "I've considered it, and I still think it's a bad idea." Meanwhile, Claire sat across from her parents in their luxurious dining room, picking at her food. "Claire, you're being stubborn," Patricia Miller said, her voice gentle but firm. "This merger could secure our future." "Stubborn?" Claire snapped. "I'm being realistic. We don't need Adams Enterprises to survive. We're doing just fine on our own." Robert sighed. "Sometimes, collaboration is the best path forward." Claire shook her head, refusing to be swayed. "Not this time." The next morning, Jake and Claire, both still fuming from their respective dinner discussions, arrived at their offices with renewed determination. As luck would have it, they both ended up at a local coffee shop, seeking a caffeine boost to start their day. Claire spotted Jake first, her irritation flaring. She approached him with a scowl. "Fancy seeing you here, Adams." Jake looked up, equally surprised and annoyed. "Miller, what brings you here?" Claire rolled her eyes. "Same as you, I assume. Coffee." They stood in awkward silence until the barista called their names. As they reached for their drinks, their hands brushed, causing both to pull back quickly. "You know," Claire said, her tone lighter but still edged with sarcasm, "for someone who prides himself on being composed, you seemed pretty flustered last night." Jake narrowed his eyes. "And you were your usual charming self, I'm sure." They both paused, the tension hanging in the air. Finally, Jake sighed. "Look, we're both in a difficult position. Maybe we can agree to disagree, at least for now." Claire smirked. "Truce? For now." Jake nodded. "Truce. Hashtag, 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 an unexpected proposal." Back at Adams Enterprises, Jake called a meeting with his senior staff. He needed a new approach, something unexpected. As they discussed various ideas, one of his advisors, Sarah, suggested something radical. "What if we proposed a collaboration on a smaller project?" Sarah said. "Something that could benefit both companies but isn't as drastic as a merger. It might show the boards that we can work together without fully merging." Jake considered the idea. It was risky, but it could buy them time. "I'll think about it," he said. Across town, Claire was having a similar conversation with her team. Lisa, her head of PR, suggested a joint venture. "It could demonstrate cooperation without the full commitment of a merger," Lisa explained. "It might placate the board and give us more time to find another solution." Claire mulled it over. It was unconventional, but it might just work. "All right," she agreed. "Let's see if Adams is willing to consider it." Jake and Claire arranged to meet at a neutral location, a stylish rooftop bar overlooking the city. They arrived at the same time, each determined to maintain their professional demeanor. "Adams," Claire greeted him with a nod. "Miller," Jake replied, matching her tone. They sat down, and after a moment of awkward silence, Jake spoke first. "We need to find a way to show our boards that we can work together without committing to a full merger." Claire nodded. "My team suggested a joint venture, something smaller but beneficial to both companies." Jake raised an eyebrow. "My team had a similar idea. What did you have in mind?" Claire outlined a potential project, an exclusive, limited edition fashion line combining Miller Industries' innovative textiles with Adams Enterprises' high-end design. It was ambitious but feasible. Jake considered it, then nodded. "It's a solid idea. Could work." Claire leaned back, crossing her arms. "So, we're really doing this?" Jake sighed. "Looks like it." Over the next few weeks, Jake and Claire worked together to develop the joint venture. Their teams met frequently, and though there were plenty of disagreements and heated discussions, progress was made. One particularly intense meeting ended with Claire storming out, her frustration evident. Jake followed her, catching up with her in the hallway. "Miller, wait," he called. She turned, her eyes flashing. "What, Adams?" Jake took a deep breath. "I know this isn't easy, but we're making progress. We just need to keep at it." Claire sighed, her anger dissipating slightly. I know, it's just, this is all so frustrating. Jake nodded. Tell me about it. But maybe, just maybe, we can make this work. Claire offered a reluctant smile. Maybe. Despite the constant tension, Jake and Claire found themselves gradually developing a grudging respect for each other. They were both fiercely dedicated to their families and companies, and despite their differences, they had more in common than they realized. One evening, after a particularly long day, they found themselves alone in the office. Claire glanced at Jake, her expression thoughtful. You know, Adams, you're not as insufferable as I thought, she said with a smirk. Jake chuckled. And you, Miller, are actually quite tolerable. Claire laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to ease the tension between them. I guess we're both full of surprises. Jake nodded, a small smile on his lips. Yeah, I guess we are. As they continued to work together, the initial hostility between them began to soften. There were still plenty of disagreements and fiery exchanges, but there was also a growing sense of mutual understanding. And so, with a mix of determination and reluctant camaraderie, Jake and Claire prepared for the challenges ahead. The road was still uncertain, but for the first time, they felt like they might just be able to navigate it together. As the joint venture project moved forward, both Jake and Claire found themselves spending more time together. Despite their initial reluctance, the necessity of collaboration began to chip away at the barriers between them. One bright morning, Jake arrived at the Miller Industries headquarters for a joint design meeting. As he entered the conference room, he was greeted by a few polite nods and curious glances from Claire's team. Claire walked in moments later, her expression neutral. Adams, she said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Miller, Jake replied, matching her tone. They dove into discussions about the upcoming fashion line, debating everything from fabric choices to marketing strategies. Despite the tension, there was an undeniable chemistry in their collaboration. Jake's calm, methodical approach balanced Claire's passionate, creative energy. A week later, they prepared for a crucial presentation to both boards. The success of the joint venture depended on their ability to convince the boards that this smaller project was a viable alternative to the full merger. The night before the presentation, Jake and Claire found themselves working late in a conference room, finalizing their pitch. The room was filled with the soft hum of a projector and the rustling of papers. This needs to be perfect, Claire said, her eyes fixed on the screen. We can't afford any mistakes. Jake nodded, his focus equally intense. Agreed. Let's run through it one more time. As they rehearsed their presentation, their professional facades began to slip. They exchanged a few jokes and shared stories about their respective companies, finding common ground in their dedication and hard work. Finally, they wrapped up the rehearsal. Claire leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. I never thought I'd say this, but we actually make a good team. Jake smiled. Yeah, who knew? The next day, they stood side by side in front of a room full of board members from both companies. The atmosphere was tense, but Jake and Claire were ready. Jake started the presentation, outlining the strategic benefits of the joint venture. He spoke with confidence and precision, emphasizing the financial stability and growth potential. Claire took over, passionately describing the creative aspects of the project. She highlighted the innovative use of Miller Industries textiles and the unique designs from Adams Enterprises. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and she could see the board members nodding in approval. After the presentation, they opened the floor to questions. The board members were skeptical at first, but Jake and Claire handled each question with poise and expertise. By the end, the room was buzzing with cautious optimism. As the board members filed out, Jake and Claire exchanged a look of relief and triumph. We did it, Claire said, a genuine smile lighting up her face. Jake nodded, his own smile mirroring hers. Yeah, we did. That evening, Jake and Claire decided to celebrate their success with a drink at a nearby bar. The atmosphere was relaxed, and for the first time, they felt a sense of camaraderie beyond their professional obligations. Here's to not killing each other, Claire said with a laugh, raising her glass. Jake chuckled, clinking his glass against hers. Cheers to that. They spent the evening talking about everything except work. They discovered shared interests and hobbies, laughing over childhood stories and embarrassing moments. As the night wore on, the initial barriers between them seemed to dissolve. Claire found herself appreciating Jake's dry wit and calm demeanor, while Jake admired Claire's fiery passion and unfiltered honesty. #####a new understanding. The next day, back at work, their dynamic had subtly shifted. There was still plenty of banter and disagreements, but the underlying tension had eased. They started calling each other by their first names, a small but significant step towards a more personal connection. Jake, Claire said during a meeting, her tone softer than usual. I think your idea for the fabric selection is spot on. Jake looked up, surprised but pleased. Thanks, Claire. And your marketing strategy is brilliant. As they continued to collaborate, their mutual respect grew. They began to see each other not just as rivals, but as partners working towards a common goal. One afternoon, while reviewing samples in the design studio, Claire accidentally knocked over a stack of fabric rolls. She let out an exasperated sigh as the rolls tumbled to the floor. Jake looked up from his work and couldn't help but laugh. "Need a hand?" Claire shot him a mock glare but couldn't suppress a grin. "Sure, laugh it up, Adams." Jake walked over and helped her gather the fabrics. As they worked side by side, their hands brushed, and they shared a brief, awkward moment. "Thanks," Claire said, her cheeks slightly flushed. "Anytime," Jake replied, feeling a warmth he couldn't quite explain. As the weeks passed, their joint venture began to take shape. The combined efforts of both teams produced innovative designs and marketing strategies that impressed even the most skeptical board members. One evening, after another long day, Claire invited Jake to a casual dinner at a nearby restaurant. It was a small, cozy place with a relaxed atmosphere. "Why not?" Jake agreed, feeling a sense of curiosity and anticipation. Over dinner, they talked about their families, their aspirations, and their frustrations. Claire opened up about her grandfather's legacy and her determination to honor it. Jake shared his own struggles with the expectations placed on him by his family. By the end of the evening, they both felt a deeper understanding of each other's motivations and challenges. As they walked back to their cars, Claire turned to Jake. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we're working together." Jake smiled. "Me too, Claire. Me too." And so, with a newfound sense of respect and camaraderie, Jake and Claire continued to navigate the complexities of their joint venture. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were no longer just rivals. They were partners, and perhaps, even friends. Despite the progress Jake and Claire had made, their cooperation was far from smooth sailing. Their mutual respect and growing camaraderie were constantly tested by the presence of their teams and the pressure of the looming merger. In public, old habits and rivalries resurfaced, causing their fragile alliance to strain. One morning, Claire arrived at Adams Enterprises for a joint strategy meeting. As she walked into the sleek conference room, she found Jake already there, discussing details with his team. Their eyes met briefly, and the tension in the room was palpable. "Good morning, Miller," Jake greeted her, his tone cool and professional. "Adams," Claire replied curtly, taking her seat across from him. The meeting began, and it wasn't long before disagreements flared up. Claire and Jake clashed over marketing strategies, each stubbornly defending their own ideas. "This approach won't resonate with our target audience," Claire argued, her frustration evident. "We need something more innovative." Jake's calm facade began to crack. "And your approach is too risky. We need a strategy that's reliable and proven." The room fell silent as their teams exchanged uneasy glances. The tension between the two leaders was unmistakable, and it was clear that their old animosities had resurfaced. ###### a heated argument. After the meeting, Jake and Claire found themselves alone in the conference room, the air thick with unresolved tension. "You can't keep undermining me in front of my team," Claire snapped, crossing her arms. Jake shot her a cold look. "Undermining you? You're the one who keeps pushing unrealistic ideas." Claire's eyes flashed with anger. "Maybe if you weren't so stuck in your ways, you'd see the potential in new approaches." Jake took a step closer, his voice low but firm. "And maybe if you weren't so impulsive, you'd understand the importance of caution." Their argument escalated, voices rising as they hurled accusations at each other. The progress they had made seemed to unravel in the face of their deep-seated rivalry. ######, an unfortunate incident. Later that day, both Jake and Claire were scheduled to present their progress to a group of investors. The presentation was crucial for securing additional funding for their joint venture, but the earlier argument had left both feeling on edge. As they stood side by side, ready to begin, Claire accidentally knocked over a glass of water, spilling it across the table and onto Jake's notes. She gasped, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she stammered, reaching for a napkin. Jake's expression hardened. "Just great," he muttered, trying to salvage his notes. The investors watched the scene unfold with raised eyebrows, sensing the tension between the two. Despite the mishap, they managed to get through the presentation, but the atmosphere remained strained. After the investors left, Jake turned to Claire, his frustration boiling over. "You need to be more careful," he snapped. "This project is too important for careless mistakes." Claire's eyes narrowed. "I said I was sorry. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, we wouldn't be having this problem." Jake clenched his jaw, struggling to maintain his composure. "This isn't just about the spill, Claire. We need to figure out how to work together without constantly clashing." ######, forced reconciliation. That evening, Laura Adams and Patricia Miller called an emergency meeting at a neutral location. Sensing the escalating tension between their children, they decided it was time to intervene. Jake and Claire arrived at a small, elegant restaurant, both looking reluctant and wary. "What's this about?" Claire asked, her tone guarded. "We need to talk," Laura said, her expression serious. "The tension between you two is jeopardizing everything we've worked for." Patricia nodded in agreement. "You both need to find a way to resolve your differences and work together effectively." Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're trying, but it's not that simple." Claire crossed her arms, her frustration evident. "We have too much history. It's not easy to just move past it." Laura leaned forward, her voice firm but gentle. "We understand that, but this project is bigger than your rivalry. You need to find common ground." Reluctantly, Jake and Claire agreed to try again. They spent the evening discussing their frustrations and challenges, slowly rebuilding the fragile truce they had once established. The next day, Jake and Claire approached their joint venture with renewed determination. They agreed to set aside their differences and focus on the success of the project, even if it meant swallowing their pride. During a team meeting, Jake acknowledged Claire's contributions, his tone more conciliatory. Claire had a good point about the marketing strategy. "We should consider her approach." Claire, surprised but appreciative, nodded. "And Jake's ideas on the fabric selection are solid. We should implement them." Their teams watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and curiosity. It was clear that while Jake and Claire still had a long way to go, they were making an effort to work together. As the weeks passed, Jake and Claire continued to navigate the complexities of their joint venture. There were still plenty of disagreements and heated discussions, but they also found moments of genuine collaboration and understanding. One evening, after another long day, they found themselves working late in the office. Claire glanced at Jake, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Adams, we're actually making progress," she said, her tone lighter. Jake looked up, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, Miller, we are." As they continued to work together, their initial hostility began to soften once more. They discovered that despite their differences, they were stronger as a team than as rivals. And so, with a mix of determination and reluctant camaraderie, Jake and Claire prepared for the challenges ahead. The road was still uncertain, but for the first time, they felt like they might just be able to navigate it together. Despite their recent attempts at reconciliation, Jake and Claire's cooperation remained a delicate balancing act. Their professional differences often flared into personal arguments, and the undercurrent of rivalry persisted. One morning, Claire received an urgent email about a production delay from one of their key suppliers. She immediately called Jake, her frustration evident. "Adams, we have a problem," she said, skipping formalities. "Our supplier is behind schedule, and it's going to affect our launch." Jake frowned, his fingers tapping impatiently on his desk. "How did this happen, Miller?" Claire took a deep breath, trying to keep her temper in check. "Does it matter? We need a solution, not a blame game." Jake's tone was icy. "I need to know all the details if we're going to fix this." Their conversation quickly devolved into a heated argument, with both sides digging in their heels. The tension was palpable, and it was clear that their old habits were hard to break. In the midst of their argument, Patricia Miller walked into Claire's office, catching the tail end of the heated exchange. She raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of amusement and concern. "Everything all right in here?" Patricia asked, her tone light but probing. Claire shot her mother a frustrated look. "We're just having a professional disagreement." Patricia glanced at the phone, where Jake's voice was still audible. "Is that Jake? Maybe you two should take a break and talk this through in person." Claire sighed, knowing her mother was right. "Fine. Jake, can you meet in an hour?" Jake agreed reluctantly, and they ended the call. Patricia gave Claire a reassuring smile. "You'll figure it out. Just remember, you're on the same team now." An hour later, Jake arrived at the Miller Industries office, his expression stern. Claire met him at the entrance, and they walked silently to a private meeting room. Claire took a deep breath. "We need to stop letting our personal issues affect our work. This project is too important." Jake nodded, his tone more measured. "Agreed. Let's focus on finding a solution." They spent the next few hours brainstorming and negotiating with the supplier. Despite their differences, their combined efforts yielded a workable plan to get production back on track. After resolving the issue, they both felt a sense of accomplishment. Claire glanced at Jake, her expression softening. "We actually did it." Jake managed a small smile. "Yeah, we did. Maybe we're finally getting the hang of this." In an effort to improve their working relationship, their parents suggested they attend a corporate team-building retreat. Initially, both Jake and Claire balked at the idea, but eventually, they agreed, hoping it might help ease the tension. The retreat was held at a picturesque lodge in the mountains, designed to foster cooperation and camaraderie among corporate teams. Jake and Claire arrived separately but soon found themselves thrust into various group activities together. The first activity was a trust-building exercise, where one person was blindfolded and guided by their partner through an obstacle course. Claire and Jake exchanged skeptical looks as they were paired together. "This should be interesting," Claire muttered, reluctantly putting on the blindfold. Jake took her hand, guiding her carefully through the course. Despite their initial awkwardness, they managed to complete the exercise without incident, and by the end, they were both laughing. "Maybe there's hope for us yet," Jake said, his tone lighthearted. Claire grinned. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Adams." Later that evening, after a long day of team-building exercises, the group gathered around a bonfire. Claire and Jake found themselves sitting next to each other, sharing stories and reflecting on the day's events. "I never thought I'd say this, but today was actually fun," Claire admitted, staring into the flames. Jake nodded. "I agree. It's been a while since I've enjoyed myself like this." As the conversation continued, they discovered more about each other's personal lives, hobbies, favorite books, and even embarrassing childhood stories. The more they talked, the more they realized how much they had in common. Claire looked at Jake, her expression thoughtful. "You know, for all our differences, we actually make a pretty good team." Jake smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Yeah, we do." The next day, they returned to their offices with a renewed sense of purpose. The retreat had given them a fresh perspective, and they were determined to make their partnership work. During a joint team meeting, Jake and Claire presented their plans for the next phase of the project. Their teams noticed the change in their dynamic. There was still plenty of banter and disagreements, but it was clear that the underlying hostility had eased. "Jake's idea for the marketing campaign is really innovative," Claire said, surprising everyone with her praise. "We should implement it." Jake looked equally surprised but pleased. "And Claire's approach to the design process has been incredibly effective. I think it's a great direction for us." As they continued to work together, their relationship grew stronger. They learned to navigate their differences, using their contrasting strengths to complement each other. One evening, after another productive day, Claire invited Jake to dinner at a small, cozy restaurant she loved. Over dinner, they talked about their hopes and fears, their ambitions, and the pressures of living up to their family legacies. "I used to think you were just another obstacle in my way," Claire admitted, her voice soft. "But now I see that you're someone I can rely on." Jake reached across the table, taking her hand. "I've always respected you, Claire, even when we were at each other's throats. Now, I'm glad we're on the same side." As they walked back to their cars, they felt a newfound sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, not just as partners, but as friends. And so, with a mix of determination and growing affection, Jake and Claire prepared for the challenges ahead. The road was still uncertain, but for the first time, they felt like they might just be able to navigate it together, building a bridge that could withstand even the strongest storms. As the weeks passed, Jake and Claire's joint venture began to show significant progress. Their combined efforts resulted in innovative designs and marketing strategies that impressed even the most skeptical board members. However, despite their growing camaraderie, tension still simmered beneath the surface. One afternoon, during a routine board meeting, Laura Adams and Robert Miller announced an unexpected proposal. Given the success of the joint venture, Laura began, "We believe it's time to revisit the merger." Jake and Claire exchanged stunned glances. They had worked hard to make the joint venture successful, but the idea of a full merger was still a sensitive subject. Robert continued, "We've seen what you two can accomplish together. This merger could take both companies to new heights." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake and Claire knew they had to respond carefully, but their initial reactions were far from aligned. After the meeting, Jake and Claire retreated to a private office to discuss the proposal. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and it wasn't long before their old animosities resurfaced. "This is exactly what we were trying to avoid," Claire said, pacing the room. "We agreed the joint venture was a compromise." Jake nodded, his expression serious. "I know, but the board sees the success and wants to capitalize on it." Claire's frustration boiled over. "So we're just supposed to forget everything and go along with this merger?" Jake's calm demeanor slipped. "I'm not saying that, but we need to consider the bigger picture." Claire stopped pacing and faced him, her eyes flashing. "The bigger picture? This merger could destroy everything we've worked for. We'll lose our identities, our control." Jake took a deep breath, trying to remain composed. "Or it could be an opportunity to create something even greater. We need to think strategically." Their argument escalated, with neither willing to back down. The old wounds of their family's rivalry reopened, and their recent camaraderie seemed to evaporate in the heat of the moment. That evening, Claire found herself sitting alone in her apartment, replaying the argument in her mind. She knew Jake had valid points, but the thought of merging with Adam's enterprises brought back all the fears and insecurities she had been trying to overcome. Meanwhile, Jake sat in his own apartment, staring out at the city skyline. He understood Claire's concerns, but he also saw the potential benefits of the merger. They had come so far together. Surely they could find a way to navigate this new challenge. The next day, Jake decided to make a gesture of goodwill. He arrived at Miller Industries with a bouquet of flowers and an apology. Claire was taken aback by the unexpected gesture. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she asked, her tone a mix of surprise and curiosity. "I came to apologize," Jake said sincerely. "We both want what's best for our companies. I don't want this merger to ruin what we've built." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I appreciate that, and I'm sorry too. This merger is just a lot to process." They sat down and talked through their concerns, finding common ground and reaffirming their commitment to making the best decision for both companies. Over the next few days, Jake and Claire met with their respective teams to discuss the potential merger. They knew they needed to present a united front if they were to convince the boards to proceed cautiously. During a joint team meeting, Jake addressed the group. "We understand the merger proposal has raised a lot of questions. Claire and I are committed to ensuring that any decision made is in the best interest of both companies." Claire added, "We need to analyze all potential impacts and make sure our identities and core values are preserved. This isn't just about combining resources. It's about creating a sustainable future for both our brands." Their teams responded positively, appreciating the transparency and thoughtful approach. It was clear that Jake and Claire's leadership was respected, even if the merger remained a contentious issue. One evening, after a particularly intense day of meetings, Jake and Claire decided to take a break and grab dinner at a quiet restaurant. The stress of the merger discussions weighed heavily on both of them, and they needed a moment to decompress. As they talked over dinner, the conversation turned personal. Claire opened up about her fears of losing her family's legacy and the pressure she felt to live up to her grandfather's expectations. "I just don't want to lose what makes Miller Industries unique," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. Jake reached across the table, taking her hand. "I understand, Claire, and I promise I won't let that happen. We'll find a way to make this work without losing who we are." Claire looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. For the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that they could navigate this challenge together. The next day, Jake and Claire presented a revised proposal to their boards, outlining a phased approach to the merger that would allow for careful integration and preservation of each company's unique identity. Their united front and thoughtful strategy impressed the board members, and the proposal was met with cautious approval. As they left the meeting, Claire turned to Jake. "We did it. We convinced them to take it slow." Jake smiled. "Yeah, we did. And we'll make sure this merger works for both of us." Their partnership, once forged in rivalry and conflict, had evolved into a bond of mutual respect and shared goals. They knew the road ahead would still be challenging, but they were ready to face it together. And so, with a mix of determination and cautious optimism, Jake and Claire prepared for the next phase of their journey. The storm of emotions had tested their resolve, but it had also strengthened their partnership, forging a path towards a future where they could build something truly remarkable together. With the phased merger proposal approved, Jake and Claire faced the daunting task of integrating their teams. They knew that blending two corporate cultures, each with its own identity and values, would be a significant challenge. The first joint meeting of the newly merged team was scheduled for a bright Monday morning. Employees from both companies gathered in a spacious conference room at a neutral location. The room buzzed with a mix of curiosity, excitement, and apprehension. Jake stood at the front of the room, trying to project calm confidence. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, we are embarking on a new chapter. This merger presents us with incredible opportunities, but it also requires collaboration and mutual respect." Claire nodded in agreement. "We understand there are concerns and uncertainties, but together, we can leverage our strengths and create something truly innovative." Despite their united front, it was clear that many team members were wary. The meeting was punctuated with questions and cautious optimism, but there were also undercurrents of skepticism and resistance. In the days that followed, Jake and Claire worked tirelessly to build trust and foster a sense of unity among their teams. They organized team-building activities, workshops, and informal gatherings to encourage interaction and collaboration. One afternoon, they held a company-wide brainstorming session to generate ideas for their first joint project. The session was lively, with employees from both sides sharing their thoughts and suggestions. As Jake facilitated the discussion, he noticed Claire scribbling furiously in her notebook. During a break, he approached her, curious. "What are you working on so intently, Miller?" Claire looked up, a mischievous grin on her face. "Just some ideas for the new product line. I think we can really push the boundaries with this one." Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Care to share?" Claire hesitated for a moment, then handed him her notebook. As Jake read through her notes, his eyes widened with appreciation. These are brilliant. We should definitely present this to the team. Claire smiled, pleased by his reaction. Glad you think so, Adams. With renewed enthusiasm, Jake and Claire presented their collaborative ideas to the team. The project involved creating a limited edition fashion line that combined the innovative textiles of Miller Industries with the high-end designs of Adams Enterprises. The team responded positively, energized by the creative potential of the project. As they worked together, the initial barriers began to dissolve, replaced by a growing sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. One afternoon, while working late in the design studio, Jake and Claire found themselves alone, discussing the finer details of the project. I have to admit, I was skeptical at first, Jake said, glancing at Claire. But this collaboration is turning out better than I expected. Claire nodded, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I know what you mean. It's amazing what we can achieve when we combine our strengths. Their conversation flowed naturally, moving from work to more personal topics. They shared stories about their childhoods, their families, and their hopes for the future. As the evening wore on, they realized just how much they had in common. As the weeks passed, the bond between Jake and Claire grew stronger. Their professional partnership flourished, and their personal connection deepened. They found themselves looking forward to their late-night work sessions, where they could talk openly and honestly. One evening, after a particularly productive day, Jake and Claire decided to take a break and go for a walk. The city was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, and the streets were quiet and peaceful. As they walked, Claire glanced at Jake, her expression thoughtful. You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we're doing this together. Jake smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. Me too, Claire. Me too. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. The air was cool and refreshing, and the tension that had once defined their relationship seemed to have melted away. Just when it seemed like everything was falling into place, a new challenge emerged. One morning, Jake received a call from Laura Adams. Her voice was filled with concern. Jake, we've received an offer from a major competitor to buy out our joint venture, Laura said. It's a substantial offer, and the board is considering it. Jake's heart sank. He knew that selling the joint venture could undo all the progress they had made. He immediately called Claire to discuss the situation. Claire was equally dismayed by the news. We can't let this happen, Jake. We've worked too hard to let it all go to waste. They decided to call an emergency meeting with the board to present a counterproposal. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to develop a plan that would demonstrate the long-term value and potential of their collaboration. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Jake and Claire stood side by side, ready to present their case. The room was filled with tension as the board members listened to their proposal. Jake began, outlining the financial stability and growth potential of their joint venture. He emphasized the innovative products they had developed and the strong market response. Claire followed, passionately describing the creative synergy between their companies and the unique value they brought to the industry. She highlighted the collaborative culture they had fostered and the bright future ahead. As they finished their presentation, the room fell silent. The board members exchanged glances, weighing the decision carefully. Finally, Laura Adams spoke. Thank you, Jake and Claire. Your dedication and vision are evident. We will take your proposal into serious consideration. After the meeting, Jake and Claire waited anxiously for the board's decision. They knew they had done everything they could, but the outcome was still uncertain. Later that evening, they received the news they had been hoping for. The board had decided to reject the buyout offer and proceed with the joint venture. Jake and Claire were elated. They had faced yet another challenge and emerged stronger than ever. Their partnership, once forged in rivalry and conflict, had become a powerful force for innovation and success. As they celebrated their victory, Jake and Claire realized just how far they had come. They had learned to trust each other, to navigate their differences, and to build a future that honored both their legacies. One evening, as they stood on the rooftop of their office building, looking out at the city lights, Claire turned to Jake with a smile. We did it, Jake. We really did it. Jake took her hand, his heart filled with gratitude and admiration. Yes, we did, Claire. And this is just the beginning. As they stood together, united by their shared vision and growing affection, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And so, with a mix of determination and hope, Jake and Claire prepared for the next phase of their journey. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were ready to navigate it together, building a future that was stronger, brighter, and filled with endless possibilities.